Welcome to everyone who's joining in this webinar on online child safety conducted by Citizen Digital Foundation. We are happy to have you with us on this journey with Alice down the rabbit hole, which is a metaphor for all the onslaught of toxic algorithmic recommendations that are taking children in India and elsewhere down damaging, hurtful, and inappropriate content pathways. To just set context to what we're talking about here, I'm just going to refer to The Anxious Generation, a recent book published by Jonathan Haidt, which has had researchers, parents, educators on the internet divided. Some of the critiques for the book include the fact that, they say social media or smartphone usage should not be conflated with the mental health and other issues that children are facing, because that's a mere correlation and not causation. Some of them are saying that social media is net good, so why are we talking about the negatives? There's always collateral damage for growth. And then there are others who talk about the fact that only skeptics see the harms mostly. It's not everyone. So we know here that these are binary and reductive arguments without seeing the complex cultural and other layers that are involved in these kinds of issues. Smarter people would understand that each child is unique. The self-determination levels vary in all of them. Not every child on the internet is facing issues. Some of them have stronger resilience powers to face the powerful onslaught of recommendations. Whereas, does that mean that there are not enough children facing issues? No. There are a lot of direct and indirect harms being recorded across the spectrum. We are familiar with some of the direct harms through media reports, through public outcries, through personal experiences, as well as anecdotal experiences. And then there is a bunch of indirect harms, which is where a lot of people talk about, the correlation aspect, that, these are not just the product of social media or smartphones. But there is no negating the fact that social media has had a very crucial role, especially since 2012, in exacerbating some of these issues, which can be equated to causation. If we look at merely addiction as one of the aspects, the definition of that is how the rewarding aspects of either a substance or a behavior can provide a compelling incentive to repeat that particular activity despite detrimental consequences. Now, this is something that social media platforms have harnessed as a tenet to make sure that they have tapped into the vulnerabilities of younger and vulnerable populations. Nikki Reisberg, who is the host of a child safety podcast, she says that Meta has performed extensive research to understand the brain function of young people. Why? To defeat young people's ability to self-regulate their time spent on its platform. A May 2020 presentation prepared by Meta researchers titled Teen Fundamentals discussed nearly 80 studies of their own product research, highlighting vulnerabilities of the teenage brain. They discussed teen brains' relative immaturity and teenagers' tendency to be driven by emotion and the intrigue of novelty and reward. And quite troublingly, the researchers assessed these brain functions to drive product usage, noting that the teenage brain happens to be pretty easy to stimulate. Now, that is quite telling. We have often seen a lot of tech CEOs standing in judicial hearings in the US Congress defending that they are completely actively for protecting children online, and they would never intentionally cause them harm, and that they're spending millions of dollars on making sure that trust and safety aspects are maintained on the platform. However, this turns out to be a lot of lip service because it directly clashes with the incentive of the platforms profit-making mechanisms that are driven by engagement, and which has led to this very powerful moment in the very recent Judicial Committee hearing where Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, was seen apologizing to a room full of parents, holding up photographs of their children either severely harmed or even have taken their lives. This was a moment which was quite pronounced, and it was obviously spoken a lot about in the media, but this has to still trickle down in India. We're still not able to, feel the power of these platforms and how much they are affecting vulnerable minds. A recent Meta whistleblower talked about how the companies actually know that design fixes are possible, but without realigning the incentives away from the profit and engagement metrics, the bottom lines will always be prioritized. And this is where organizations like Citizen Digital Foundation, Social Media Matters, Space to Grow, Quantum Hub, Responsible Netism, thank you, Sonali, for joining. And I believe Bodhini is also here. I'm really grateful for these organizations doing the kind of work that they're doing. We at CDF speak to end users about moderation and not extremes of, don't use or use, and mindful engagement, because potent and powerful technologies come with profound risks. We talk about platform accountability because there is no point in just putting band-aids on wounds. We have to treat the root cause of the incentives. And that's why children first policies are also a priority. This has to be a non-negotiable when it comes to child safety. They cannot be collateral damage in the process of growth and economic pursuit. And to everyone present here, please partner with us in our activities. Those are our contact details. I would like to now hand over to Aditi Pillai. I'm quite proud of the work that she has done with this paper on YouTube rabbit hole per se. She's going to present the highlights of this. Our objective with this webinar, as well as the paper presentation and the discussion that follows today, is that more Alices and Alias in our country should be encouraged to and not held back from pursuing their curiosities uninhibitedly, so they can explore all the online wonderlands without fear of being led down toxic rabbit holes. Aditi, take it away. And after this, we will have Dhanya Krishna Kumar, who's a parent, share her perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi. Once again, I'll share my screen now. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm really happy that I got to be a part of this work at CDF. And hi, everyone. I'm Aditi. I'm the Research and Programs Executive at CDF. And I'll be taking you through the key highlights of our paper, the YouTube rabbit hole, which is titled Exploring Child Safety in Relation to Content in Regional Languages on YouTube and YouTube Kids. But before we go right into the findings of the study, I'd like to add some perspective on why exactly we thought it was necessary to do such a study in the first place. So why did we join Alice on our journey down YouTube's rabbit hole? Firstly, harmful content is ubiquitous or common on YouTube and YouTube Kids. As early as 2015, the Wall Street Journal reported on FTC's complaint against the YouTube Kids app that it contained inappropriate content. Fast forward to 2018, and Google apologized after more inappropriate content was found on the YouTube Kids app. And in 2019, the YouTube team put out a blog in which it claimed to take new initiatives to protect minors and families. However, as of 2023, as evidenced by our study and through media outlets covering parents discovering harmful content on their children's feeds, the situation remains virtually unchanged. Now, before we move on, I'd also like to reiterate something Nidhi said, which is that platforms like YouTube are incentivized to promote such content, although they do not have the intent to harm children. So in this case, the algorithms keep recommending content that engages children for longer through primal and sensational content, even though their intent may not be to directly harm the children. Now coming to the 2023 Google for India Summit, where Meera Chhatz, the head of government and public policy for YouTube India, said that YouTube had been taking proactive measures to combat the rise of harmful content through content moderation on the platform. Now, this brings me to our second point, wherein a global witness study which analyzed DSA's transparency reports found that in English, YouTube had 15,000 content moderators, whereas in other non-English languages, the content moderators were all in the single and double digits. And moving on to the third reason, YouTube is a popular platform among Indian children and parents. A 2021 survey conducted by Akatsuki Incorporated, a Japanese media company, found that 76% of Indian parents preferred YouTube for animated content for their children. And the majority of 37% of them preferred to let their kids consume content while unsupervised. Now, coming to a fourth, more personal reason, once upon a time, I was Alice. And I went down many rabbit holes. And this was really what helped me take the study forward. And like Nidhi said, through the study, we wanted to evidence the experiences of many Alices and Alias in India to ensure that no one exploits or takes advantage of her curiosity as she wanders down different rabbit holes. Now, this brings me to the objectives of our study. We wanted to assess how a child organically reaches harmful content on YouTube and YouTube Kids. We also wanted to gauge how efficient YouTube's parental control mechanisms are on such platforms in protecting children from such content. And lastly, we wanted to see whether an awareness and application of YouTube's parental control mechanisms could help protect children on these platforms. Coming to the methodology, how exactly did we join Alice on her journey? What were the methods we used? So firstly, we had to become Alice. As the author of the study, we assumed the role of a hypothetical child who is 9 years old and who consumes content in English, Hindi, and Malayalam. We then placed her into 4 contexts on the basis of her caregiver's supervision and the enforcement of parental control mechanisms. I'll go through these in detail later on when we present the findings of the study. And then we had to find the search terms that Alice would use to find content on these platforms. The rationale behind these search terms have been explained in detail in the study. You can refer back to that for more information. And lastly, we had to identify how exactly we would classify content unsuitable for children. In this scenario, we chose the Motion Pictures Association of America's rating system as opposed to YouTube's own self-regulated guidelines, as YouTube's own set of guidelines may have a certain conflict of interest with their lucrative business model. And we wanted to remain as objective as possible when ascertaining that a certain piece of content was inappropriate for a child. These classifications are based on various factors like violence, drug use, sex, and alcohol. And in these classifications, only G-rated content would be suitable for Alice as she's consuming content unsupervised. So what did we find and what were the results? In the first context, Alice was given access to YouTube, but she was not restricted in any way and she was not supervised. By this, I mean that the restricted mode, which is an inbuilt feature on the YouTube app, was not enforced. For the search term Princess Elsa in English, the first recommendation we found had a confusing medley of keywords in the title, which in turn led to another live stream and then led Alice down a rabbit hole of harmful content. Now here I'd like to quickly mention that it was not the content of the videos itself that led Alice down the rabbit hole, but rather the titles which featured these keywords, which in turn triggered the algorithm to recommend similar content. Like you can see in the image on the right side, it also recommended sexual content for this search term. Moving on, for the search term Peppa, we encountered content wherein Peppa engaged in violent activities and adult content. For the search term Hindi cartoon, we had an array of videos which did not condone body shaming, which peddled harmful tropes of caste, class, and misogyny, and a whole slew of other inappropriate content, which would engage a child's attention for longer. Now, for the search term Chinchan Hindi, we had a different kind of harm, in the sense that often on platforms like YouTube, adults take on pseudonyms which belong to kids' characters. In this case, a YouTuber went by the pseudonym Shinchan, which in turn caused the recommendation system to recommend a video which would not be suitable for a child. This is one of the more indirect harms of engaging with YouTube and letting your kids do so unsupervised. For the search term Malayalam cartoon, once again, we found misogynistic content, adult content that would be inappropriate for a child. And for the search term Boban and Molly, which is a very popular Malayalam cartoon, we found that the thumbnail of the recommendations often featured the minor characters, the characters who are minors, placed in inappropriate scenes, whereas the videos itself would not feature any of this content. So this again is another tactic which bad actors employ on these platforms, wherein the thumbnails themselves are more sensational than the content themselves, so that kids will engage with the video and remain till the end to find out where this content belongs. Moving to the second context. In this context, Alice had complete access to YouTube, except that the YouTube app was set to the restricted mode. The results remained virtually the same. Therefore, I'm not going into detail. In the third context, the YouTube Kids app was what Alice used, and she was given unrestricted access, in that no parental control mechanisms were enforced. In this context, we encountered content that falls into a virtual gray area, in the sense that while this content may classify as G-rated, depending on the sensitivity or the nature of the individual child, it may harm them in ways that only a caregiver or a person responsible for the child would be able to ascertain. So this is one of the areas wherein the content may be G-rated, but it would behoove the parent to decide whether it is appropriate for the child or not. One curious thing that we encountered when we used this search term Shinchan Hindi was that no content was recommended on the YouTube Kids platform, which begs the question, is Shinchan actually inappropriate for children? And if so, why was it recommended on the normal YouTube platform in the restricted mode? Now, coming to the last context, in this context, she was given access to YouTube Kids, but her access was restricted. She could not use the search bar and the autoplay feature was turned off. In this context, she remained the safest. She encountered no harmful content. She was strictly limited to the content her caregiver selected, and all recommendations remained appropriate, even when it was of content, even when it was content of characters like Peppa Pig or Elsa, like we saw in the previous content. Now, this brings me to our key findings, which is that harmful content is common on YouTube and YouTube Kids. YouTube's efforts to remove harmful content has been inadequate. YouTube Kids does offer a safer experience than YouTube, but only when parental controls are enforced and caregiver awareness and action is key. And lastly, if the algorithm continues to reward such engagement, it will only result in the proliferation of such content. I'd like to wind up with a few discussion points. Firstly, the evidence in the study may be ephemeral in the sense that harmful content is often reported and taken down on such platforms. However, it does not take away from the main message of the study, which is that there is a very real harm to children on YouTube and YouTube Kids when unsupervised and when not taken care of by their caregivers. Secondly, to take the study forward, we would have to supplement our secondary research with primary research, such as screenshots of a child's actual browsing experience on YouTube or YouTube Kids. And lastly, it behooves parents, educators, governments, and policymakers to intervene and take action so that children remain safe on these platforms. Now, if you'd like to read the full study, you can either scan the QR code or navigate to our website and follow the path, citizendigitalfoundation.org, our work, publications, and navigate to our paper to read either the full paper or the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. Akash has also very kindly shared the link to the paper in the chat for whoever is interested in reading it. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Payal Padhi, who has helped us convert this paper into a report, which is also available on our website. And Payal has also kindly joined us here today. We will open up the Q&A to the paper as well at the end of the discussion, which is around 4:15. Before we start the discussion with our esteemed panelists, I would like to invite Dhanya Krishna Kumar. Dhanya is a former financial and business journalist and is currently VP of Corporate Business at Global Talent Track. But like most parents in the room would agree, her equally full-time job is raising a brilliant 14-year-old girl. I'm also proud to call Dhanya a good friend of mine, so I invite her to share the journeys she navigates as a parent to a digital native.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. And yeah, as rightfully put, and I was seeing some of those things, and as a parent of a teenager, in a time where there's so many influences, and it's almost a crime to try to, give them a reality check. It's tough to navigate this little conundrum that we're faced with. So I actually wanted to be part of this, and these are conversations that I've had with Nidhi multiple times while talking to my daughter about certain safety features. But I'm here with certain personal stories of what I've heard from friends and from my daughter's friends. And what has been worrying is actually the fact that most parents actually do not want to talk about some of these dangers that are out there with their children. And I've had parents come back to me and say things like, we don't want to intrude on the privacy of our teenager. We need to be hands-off parents. And I've been told that I'm a helicopter mom because I wanted to apprise my child of some of the dangers that are out there. In fact, my own daughter has told me that I'm probably the scariest mom out there because I'm forever bombarding her with information and pretty much scaring her from accessing the internet. But it's like I said, having been a journalist and having had access to some of the information, probably you want her to be apprised of what is out there. But, the Alice story and the things that I saw online as part of the paper has been a point of discussion and concern because children are nowadays, I've seen it with my own child's peer group, where they have absolute and unadulterated access. Nobody's, I mean, forget time limits. There's nobody even talking to them about what are the dangers out there. And children are doing all kinds of things at all sorts of times, and even going ahead and sharing it with each other. And then, sometimes when you're caught in a moment of naughtiness, if I might put it that way, they then want to blame a peer or a friend for having forced it down their throat instead of them having stumbled upon it themselves. And unfortunately, while we tell them to go on the internet to find out things, they're also learning the wrong things. And we unfortunately are too scared to engage in a discussion with them, and I think that's wrong. But I've not found, I don't know if this, I mean, and I'm right now based in Kerala, and I speak to parents across. I have friends in the UK and otherwise who actually talk to their children about it. And what I've seen is when we try to apprise our children or educate them about the, terrors out there, or at least the scary things out there, they become a handful of, shall I say, shunned teenagers or termed nerdy and put away because they don't want to do the so-called fun hip hop happening things. They're not part of the vibe. They're not part of the gang. And then they tend to then face a different kind of bullying in a live sense. And then it also moves on to WhatsApp and other situations where, because they're not being cool enough, they're being picked on. So it's a very, very fine line here. I mean, you need to tell them what to do and what not to do. But if you don't do it, then you tend to become somebody who's picked on by other children. My friend's 17-year-old is right now going through therapy because a bunch of his classmates decided to gang up on him and bully him on WhatsApp because he wasn't cool enough and he wasn't doing some of the things that they were doing. And they didn't find out till very late in the day. And these are parents who are both working parents, busy, so they've given the child a device, and the child is at home with the grandparents, but the grandparents obviously don't know better, and the child wants to argue that, you know what, you don't understand what is happening. So I, as a parent, as somebody who cannot hold back handing over a device to a child beyond a certain point, and I fought it till she was 14, actually. She got her, she's had access to a device only now. But even then, that I saw her pay a price for it with her peers in class in the physical realm for not having been cool enough. And there have been moments of doubt, self-doubt as a parent, whether I was doing the right thing or I was being more of a bad mom, or, shall I say, an overly puritanical mom by not allowing my daughter to be online doing some of those things. And then you see a generation which is setting up Facebook accounts for children who are not even born, and then, putting them out there and sharing photographs and whatever not. I've had my daughter complain that I don't put up pictures of her on status updates. And I tell her I have, a lot of unnecessary people have access to my number because of the work I do, and I do not want them to be taking screenshots or taking it away. But she complains that that's because I'm not proud enough, because everybody else in her class, every other mom is putting up funny pictures or whatever and sharing their achievements online. So as a parent, I walk a very fine line, and you almost guilt trip every single day because you're apparently not cool enough. But I don't know if cool actually means at this point in time, seeing some of the experiences of people around me, actually means allowing them to be endangered, allowing them to be falling prey to all sorts of dangers. So I don't know if I've run out of time, Nidhi, so please feel free to stop me as and when I do. But
yes.
I do have concerns and worries, and I'm hoping there are some answers and people will talk more to parents about this. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to voice some of my concerns.
Thank you, Dhanya, for giving in to my peer pressure and being the parent voice in this room, although there are many parents. And you have quite rightly pointed to some of the issues. But look at that. We are still talking about urban parents. We are, to an extent, digitally literate as well, still facing these problems. But I know some of the organizations that are here with us today are seeing these issues unravel at rural and urban levels, and they all have very, very fine nuances and details to discuss here. So without further ado, I will initiate the panel discussion. I want to give a shout out to Bodhini as well as Responsible Netizen to join us here, to be kind enough to join us here. And I really look forward to hearing more from parents as well as the organizations that have joined here towards the end when we have our Q&A open. To set the panel discussion in motion, I'd like to point that while there is sufficient research on direct and indirect harms from excessive SST or screen sedentary time as it is classified abroad, there's a huge gap of sufficient local studies or documentation. This is where civil society organizations like CDF come in, organizations like Space to Grow, the Quantum Hub and WILAC, Social and Media Matters, Responsible Netism, and Bodhini are conducting studies documenting on-ground insights and tackling the fallouts on ground. So it's not a phantom that we are fighting, it's a very, very palpable issue. To introduce the panelists, I have Aparajita Bharti with me. She is the founding partner of the Quantum Hub, a leading public policy research firm, and co-founder of Youth Leaders for Active Citizenship, which works to increase youngsters' engagement with the democratic processes. Aparajita has a background in corporate affairs and communications and public policy. She holds a master's degree in public policy from the Blavatnik School of Government at Oxford University and is a World Economic Forum Global Shapers alumna. Arnika Singh is co-founder of Social Media Matters. She has facilitated online safety workshops across India and represented her work at the UN Commission on the Status of Women, among other international platforms. With a background in journalism and electronic media, Arnika's professional journey encompasses policy development, communications, and youth development projects, all while leveraging technology to drive social change. Chitra Iyer is the co-founder and CEO of Space to Grow and an award-winning social entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in education, child protection, and skill development. A recognized thought leader, Chitra's expertise includes anti-human trafficking, inclusive skill development, digital safety, and child protection. He was recognized as a change maker in 2021 by the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Nivedita Krishna is the founder director of PACTA, a law firm and policy think tank. She supports legal operations for nonprofits in India and other developing nations, focusing on areas like education, philanthropy, technology, disability, gender, and public health. Her work includes a UN Women's Study on gender equality laws in corporate India and research on inclusive education post-COVID. Thank you all the panelists for joining me here. We'll get into the questions. To start with, both Space to Grow and the Quantum Hub have done some research on children and screen viewing habits in India. Chitra, would you speak to some of the key findings in Space to Grow's Digital Safety of Children report, which is about creating safe online spaces study, to set further context? What really is the issue here? And Akash, thank you. Would you just share the report on the chat window for the other people in the audience? Chitra, could you?
Sure. Great. Thank you so much, first of all, for having this discussion. It's extremely great that we're talking about this, but it's also great to know that there are such familiar experiences because of which it becomes even more easier to have these conversations. So I think before, charging into something which is really serious, I just wanted to have a tad bit of humor here. Dhanya, I think hearing you, what I feel is that I have stopped benchmarking myself as a parent against any parent because I feel working in the digital safety space, I think I need to really stop doing that, because half the time you're really struggling with what others are doing versus what we are doing. Totally resonate with what you have said. And thanks for presenting those pointers, Aditi and Nidhi. I think one thing I just wanted to add to that was I've been really looking at some of the large researches that have been happening, and there are some amazing systemic reviews on how parental control is effective or not effective. And it's talking about the correlation with the fact that if they do not have the knowledge and ability to really understand parental controls, it doesn't work. And many a time, I think that's a finding that has come out. So just wanted to leave those two thoughts before I start off. So basically, when we did this study, Space to Grow did this study on digital safety and harms against children. We did this in around about 4 districts in the country. Two urban and 2 rural. And what we really found, and the numbers were really astonishing. What we saw was 70% of these children were, online in the range of 1 to 5 hours per day. Also, what we tried to look at and go deep down, understand this, we figured that over 40% of the pre-teens were using both social media and gaming as platforms which were being accessed. Apart from that, I think it became a huge challenge for us to really look at that kind of data, because once you get the data, you're really struggling as to how do you really think about it, what do you do, how do you present it. So we came up with a framework, happy to share that framework with a larger audience. It's called the Space to Grow's ERPCAP framework, which is there in the report as well. We try to look at it versus, a vulnerability versus a protection matrix. So we looked at usage, risk, and behavior as the vulnerabilities of children in the online space, and knowledge, attitude, and practice as their arms to really protect themselves in the online space. And what we realized was the data showed that the vulnerabilities were high and the protection indicators were very, very, very low. Which basically meant that one of the risk factors that we saw was 40% of the children that we were meeting strangers in the online spaces, and 2/3 of them, which is like almost 60%, were meeting them offline. And these are all minors going out meeting offline strangers. We don't even know who these people are. To add on to all of this, the issue was over 60% of these children were getting affected by the fact that they did not get social validation in the online space. And they were very open about how they were feeling upset, there were mood swings, and they were feeling low. And those were some of the behavioral stuff. So we looked at usage, risk, and behavior, all the three being extremely high in terms of vulnerability. And when it came to knowledge, the first responders who actually support children, which is in that sense, like, we spoke about being a parent and how do you manage it, and educators who are the second level of responders in schools, only 35% parents were aware of digital safety and what it really meant to children. And it was only around 20% of the educators who were actually aware of this. So I think the knowledge levels became so low that in their attitudes, like when it became like, if I have a situation, where do I go? Children ended up going to their peers. 79% of the children went to their peers, which again meant that it was a set of peers who were not equipped to handle this. Parents are not equipped to handle. My educators are not, equipped to handle. So I'm left in a situation of high vulnerability constantly, with a practice that, only 3%, like, that's why, then, sorry, Dhanya, it's not that I'm calling you out many a times, but I think I really resonate with what you said. That's why I am. Only 3% were able to use mediative techniques to ensure that the children were being able to have a safe, online experience. Only 3% of the parents. And 16%, only 16% of the teachers to whom children reported online abuse actually reported it to law enforcement. So the statistics were so harrowing in terms of really understanding what the status looked like, that it was very clear that the space is pretty much in a situation of high vulnerability with limited to no protection matrix for children. And I just want to say one last thing. When you asked Nidhi that what is the issue is when having these qualitative discussions with the children, one of them said, I cannot live without my mobile. And that's an issue. I think I don't have to say more than that. I think that's the real issue.
Thank you, Chitra. Aparajita, you have been strongly advocating child-friendly design and policies. Would you shed some light on the Quantum Hub's Digital Futures and DPDPA report and how it informs your stance on the issue?
Great. Hi, Nidhi. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. Very interesting. And, I think when Space to Grow was doing this study, I think almost on at a similar time frame, Vilac was also doing a study with the Digital Champions program that we run in Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, and also Delhi with government schools. And there was some very interesting findings that we also found, which really sort of, made us think whether we can put the onus on parents, as Chitra was also saying, especially in a country like India. For example, our study shows that 80% children said, 82% children said that our parents seek help from us to navigate online platforms, right? And it's a very, and also because we were working with children who come from low income families, where the annual fees of a school is, less than 20,000 rupees, etc. That's the key area where we sort of focus on. We also saw that there's very high shared device usage, right? Like, for example, as Dhanya was saying, she was facing a lot of pressure to give a personal device. But if you actually look at low income families, it's actually more shared device usage. So one device for a family of 4 or 5 people is pretty common. And there we found out 80% children did not have their personal device. They actually were using a shared device. Now, there the problem changes completely, right? Is the parent willing to only have YouTube for kids on their phone? For example, if the parent is watching adult content on YouTube on their phone and the recommender system is showing that, and the funny thing is that I've actually seen, for example, like in our house helps, etc., they all share, devices, and their children are getting exposed because of their parents, right? Because they're using the shared device usage. And that's my problem with putting so much onus on parents only, because not all parents have the right means, knowledge, or in fact, even personal devices in an Indian context. So your study is very instructive in the sense that, we need to think of Indian ecosystem very differently from the West. I had seen the entire congressional committee discussion, and I found that some of the issues that they were discussing there actually do not apply that much in India. For example, in India, schools are very strict about not carrying phones to school. So that is not an Indian problem. I mean, there are some children who slip through the cracks and who would carry phone, and these are 11th and 12th graders, of course, because they become very smart. But as a general sort of sense, in India, we have very different style of sort of parenting, schooling, and therefore we need to identify harms in the Indian context specifically, and then think of what are the platform design issues also that we need to resolve. Because I feel like a lot of this discussion is happening in the West, but in India, it's like literally this group of people and maybe 3, 4 more people who I can see in the room right now who are listening to this webinar, who are in fact even discussing online safety of children, right? So that's just my sense that when we collected this data, we realized that it's a very different kind of problem that we are looking at here, and therefore we need to have a more considered approach to age verification. Also, the fact that we have to balance access to internet, because that means economic opportunities for kids with online safety, etc. So yeah, just like
Thanks, Aparajita. That's a very poignant point that you have raised, that the onus does not lie practically with parents alone. This has to be a concerted effort. Arnika, you have been in this field for about 10 years. We know that there is a platform accountability problem. One of Social and Media Matters' recent videos talks about influencers luring young minds through sexual self-harm or other violent inflammatory content. These influencers often are puppeteered by political or corporate hands, and they escape the platform's content moderation norms. Akash would be sharing those 2 relevant videos in the chat window now. When asked about content moderation, the platforms point to a lack of public pressure or absence of regulation and stringent fines. Can you talk about this a bit, and especially so that parents attending this can understand the consequences of this a little better?
Sure, Nidhi. Firstly, thank you for thinking of me to join the panel, and to all my co-panelists. Whatever everybody has said till now, I'm in absolute agreement. I'll bring in the field perspective, because that's what we've been doing at Social and Media Matters going to the field, speaking to the young users, and then bringing those recommendations and those actual observations and banging the table of the big tech here that, hey, this is what is happening, and this is what needs to be addressed. You're very right, Nidhi. Recently during a discussion, and because there were elections, and hence there was content that we found, and because we were looking for it, because we knew that it existed because of our experience in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities in India. And one of the panelists very rightly mentioned, India really is a very different country. India changes every 2 kilometers. And you have to look at this fact very deeply whenever we are creating policies and frameworks, that you cannot have a one box set of rules or policies that will work for a set of audience here. It will completely be meaningless. You move 2 kilometers ahead, it will completely be meaningless, because users there are dealing with a completely different issue out there. So coming back to the point, at the moment, if you look at it, I mean, all of us experts, when we dig out and we start looking at problematic content, there are videos of influencers. And when I'm saying influencers, these are popular figures. So imagine now in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, these are popular figures, which are also goons of the area, and who are promoting videos which have weapons, in their hands. And those videos, if you look at the shares, if you look at the comments, and then if you start, because of the recommended algorithm that we have, if you start looking at the recommendations once you've seen that video, you will come across such problematic content, which has, I mean, I'm giving an example, which has children with arms and weapons in them, posing with them and shooting videos with them. So what I'm trying to say is, influencers, and you're very right, these are at times political agendas that have come in between, and the recommended algorithms, due to the lack of contextual content moderation here in India, we haven't been able to take them off the platform set. Even if we are on the advisory boards, we are the people who are looking at trust and safety for them. Even if we report them, it takes very long process to take them off. But again, there is a process of appeal with which the content again appears back on the platform. So, and also for all the parents here, we need to understand that social media, when it started, it was started as it revolutionized the way people were interacting with each other on internet. But at the moment, what we are looking at are addictive designs. These are designed which are proliferating addiction. And we will never know how, because the kind of metadata that the platforms are using, the kind of algorithms and the content that appears again and again on your feed is something you will never know that how is it coming back. But the engagement on it, and the way the recommended algorithm again keeps on boosting that on your feed, is having a really bad impact on children's mental health also. I mean, in one of the reports, it was stated that more than 60% of the teenagers, they mentioned that they were reported to be under stress because of social media platforms. And yes, very rightly mentioned, the peer pressure, because you have to become cool, you have to engage in those engage with those platforms and with those content. Even for discussion, you need to know of it. And if you don't know about that particular content or that influencer, you're not talking about it, that again puts you down in the list of, in the coolness category out there. So yeah, all influencers, some of them do talking about body image issues, which is very good, but we also need to look at some other issues. There are an influencer, I'm not only talking about people, individual figures as per se, but these whole groups, like we can talk about the Yahoo Boys group, we can talk about the other challenges, the Blue Whale, the Momo challenge and stuff like that, which really influence the teenagers, the young minds who are out there in the social media spaces most of the times without any oversight. So that's the kind of world we are living in. Yeah, I think I'm over my time. Happy to speak more about it later.
Thank you, Arnika. Very key point that the design of some of these technologies have been a conscious effort to tap into vulnerabilities. In the interest of time, I'll just switch to the platform accountability question. Chitra, you have been closely working on the documenting physical and online harms against children. Where do you find the most mismatch between the actual issues faced by children online and the platform's stances on accountability? Chitra, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying that, I'll take it a step further. I think the mismatch is at two levels. It's not just at the platform level, but it's also at the law enforcement level. Because what's really happening, and one of the researches that we're doing currently is about looking at online safety and offline harms and what's really happening. And I just wanted to share a case study here, just to highlight what's really happening. So what's really happening is that today, girls or boys on, say, an Instagram or Facebook or any of these platforms, once they meet, a new person, a stranger, which was from the previous research that I spoke about, you meet strangers, you start becoming friendly. There is a space for having these conversations online in a hidden way because you don't have the controls that you have to have. Many of these children who have actually met these, individuals or strangers have been lured not just for, offline, where they have actually gone and met and have been abused as a POXO case, but these are leading to trafficking issues as well. But what is really happening, and with the biggest miss, one is once the law enforcement steps in, this just becomes like a case of POXO or it becomes a case of human trafficking. Nobody has actually questioned the platform for where the modus operandi of an issue like this really happened. So I think platforms accountability, if you ask me, is abysmally low at this point in time, because neither the parents nor the children nor the law enforcement, the ecosystem which has to protect the child, is not seeing platform accountable. And when that happens, to get these platforms accountable will become a huge challenge. And again, a lot of work that we've been doing, I think what we've seen is that most of the countries outside, it is the government and legislation which is making a lot of these platforms accountable rather than the platforms being accountable by themselves. And there is a low level of work that is happening around, like someone just said, that because there is not enough pressure from the civil society or the media and stuff, that the platforms are not becoming accountable. Having said that, I think I just want to bring in the other side. I think it's not that platforms don't want to be accountable. When you pressurize them to be, they will be. And one of the examples is the work that we've done with Vedantu, which is an edtech platform. And we have really worked with them systematically over a period of 2.5 years. And we can very proudly say, and they can say for themselves, that they're a child-safe platform. We saw issues of harm on the platform. We saw there were issues that they were facing. But I think a top-down approach of, say, the founders, of really making sure that a platform has to be accountable, they are able to make it accountable. And the solution is just very, very clearly fold. One, they have to work on their product. So working on their profanity filters and looking at chatbots to really create that and making the platform safe is one. Second, to really build in awareness as a part of the entire system itself. And it's not like, just do one awareness program and it's over. How do you integrate awareness into the overall system? Having a reporting and redressal mechanism internally for platforms, whether it is edtech or gaming or social media, which has to be, like we just spoke, they have to be immediately responsive. There's just no point that an act has happened and you're going to wait for hours that you are not getting any response. And engaging with the government and really making those policies internalize into the other parts of the ecosystem, I think that's extremely important. So I think platforms will have to be made accountable by ensuring, like, I quite like what Aparajita was saying. There is just a handful of people working, but we're all working on very different things. It's time that we really come together and have our big bet ideas that, these are the 5 things that we should really push the system and the platforms to work on. And I think that's how we will have to really drive this.
Thank you, Chitra. That's a very good example of how if a tech platforms, or like you mentioned, Vedantu being an edtech platform, if there are incentives of getting the safety of children right, then they can work towards it. Nivedita, I'd like to bring you in here. Your policy work sits at the intersection of gender, disability, and public health, and you approach solutions from a practical lens. Can you share what kind of exchanges or research have you come across thus far that validate the gravity of this situation in India? Do we really have a problem from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, good question, but bad answer that I will give is no, right? And just, I mean, it is an echo chamber. Even the one that we are right now having is an echo chamber. It's the same voices time and time again. But the problem with research, particularly in this domain in India, is that there is no funding support, right, for doing much of this. And this is a fund-intensive sort of a research requirement. And I think just looking at the wonderful work that you did, right, with Alice Down the Rabbit Hole, it is so important to actually do this and record some of these footprints, because with the digital world, these footprints will disappear if you did not act swiftly. Right, so the timeliness of this research and to create evidence, and like many of them have already said, that is that is demographically relevant to our country, is so important, because today everything is heavily Western focused. And to do something that is India focused, you need funds, and then you need the funds at the right time and the ability and the muscle to create it at the right time. Because, and we did this when we were looking at, some of the impacts of the data monopolistic practices by food delivery platforms. When we started the study, we had a particular sort of, hypothesis that platforms were using data in an abusive way. But somewhere as we did the study, we realized that the platforms stopped prioritizing their own cloud kitchens, because there was a shift, due to legislative pressures, due to certain other market pressures and policy pressures. They stopped doing it. And so we could not create the evidence to show that platforms were actually, using data in a, in an abusive way. So this is, I think, one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that there is no market imperative for this type of research, right? During the pandemic, when EdTech was going to be used by all the schools, even by government schools, and funders, even like not for profits, were beginning to use EdTech in their education interventions. Funders wanted to be sure that their funding was going to create an impact, right? And therefore, at that time, there was a lot of conversation about, there is no evidence demonstrating that EdTech is creating learning outcomes. And then a lot of money began to get invested to prove that EdTech had certain learning outcomes, right? But today, where is that imperative to prove that, social media is creating child harms, and the need to remove those child harms? There is no sort of, the most powerful sort of machinery globally, as well as, in India, are not sort of, driving this. And so the current focus as far as platforms are concerned is on anti-monopolistic practices, e-commerce, and, that is the large narrative, whereas, child harm is not paid attention to. The last point that I want to bring is that this type of research is also a very resource intensive research. So it is important that, we have the likes of behavioral specialists, you need social scientists, you need data scientists, you need lawyers, you need like tech policy experts, tech lawyers, right? And you need to assemble a team with all of these experts in order to pull through a research study that is truly meaningful. Otherwise, all we are creating is anecdotal evidence. Of course, some of you have done excellent work, whether it is Chitra or Aparajita. All of you do excellent work, but I'm sure the process through which you arrived at that funder to fund this work itself is a painful process, and it's not available at scale. So typically this type of research, you'll find it in Princeton, right? But not really, in an Indian university or in an Indian context. So yes, there is a problem. And fundamentally, I would say that the problem is in resources for research. Of course, there are problems with laws, but I think that is a point for further discussion.
Thank you, Nivedita. Very important to note that although this remains a small echo chamber right now, we need to repeatedly have these discussions and amplify it as much as possible so that at some point, the attention does come in. Because I think we have seen these movements in the past when it comes to junk food or, pollution. We have gone through these processes as a society, we have coordinated, and it's not a hopeless pursuit that we are on. It is quite possible, but we just have to keep at it. Arnika, I'm going to bring you up next. You have also worked with tech platforms on various initiatives. What kind of resistance have you faced from the tech platforms towards implementing long-term solutions, like changing the incentives of at least the algorithms that engage children in inappropriate ways?
Now with my discussions with the big tech, I have started sounding like a broken record now, because again and again, these are, we all know these are profit-driven platforms now. And hence, when the discussion is on the table, again, and we always tell that because it is profit-driven, you're not focusing and centering it on the rights and safety of the users. Recommended algorithm for once was suggested as one of the ways by which how problematic content can be probably handled, or children will not be exposed to inappropriate content. But the way recommended algorithm works, it again and again puts the problematic content on the feed of the kids and anybody who's using that particular social media platform. So kind of resistance is one towards accept, and I'll say it because there are discussions, and I'll say it, the first acceptance that you are not addressing the evolving capacities of the user and specifically the children. Secondly, you need to understand and accept that there is problematic content, and you have to accept that the content moderation done by the platforms at the moment completely is failing in India. And I can say it loud and again, till the time you're not adding context, till the time you're not understanding why that particular piece of content is problematic, you will not be able to resolve it. And you'll hear a lot of these examples that I'll again say, and that is only because we're always on the field. And at times when you are in the schools and children see that one person, or they see us and all the and every panelist and everybody who's speaking here in the platform, when they see you as a resource, they really jump on you and they want to know the solution. But that particular thing, that why reporting is not working, why reporting is not trusted by users, because you can, in a moment of panic, what a user really needs is a solution. I really need to get that intimate video or an image of mine that is being shared across to be taken in that particular moment. You cannot take 20 and 40 odd days to get back to me, and still that exists because the virality is really bad. So the resistance is towards first acceptance of the problematic content. Resistance is towards focusing on user safety, making that as a centric point rather than having profit-driven solutions by the platform. So I think the biggest, and why I get irritated by it, the biggest is this, that these platforms which started as community interaction platforms for networking and stuff, they've again become addictive in nature. There is problematic content out there. And even though there are people appointed, even though we are being told again and again that content moderation is working, this is how we are trying to deal with problematic content, the context part of it is still missing. And that sentence of mine, and I say it again, people have heard it from me 1,000 times, India changes completely at every 2 kilometers, and you have to bring in context. So I think these are the things where resistance is there. And I also think that working with groups like this, because till the time, these are the people who are on the ground, like, all the panelists who are speaking, the parents out there, the journalists, Quantum Hub, Space to Grow, everybody, Nivedita, these are the people they need to really speak to. But I really think they are, most of the times, the process is such that they work in a bubble and not really go out of it to understand that what are the exact ground issues. When we go to them and tell them like 10 new listed issues, then they come to know of it. And by the time they work on it, they listen to us and they work with us. Most of the time users are dealing with it for a very long time, and that they just completely lose the trust on the platforms. And I would say that also on organizations at time, because the time taken to complete the process, the time taken to provide a resolution to a user is a lot at the moment. And we need to understand that redressal, the process has to be very quicker and faster. So I think these are the points that I would like to mention here.
Thank you, Arnika. Aparajita, you have already talked about the lack of sufficient research in India and how just a few of us are working in this space. And Arnika, you have stressed upon the need for more awareness among possibly all across the spectrum for this problem to actually be digested and then approaches be taken, because right now a lot of chips are in the air. So I'm going to just shift the discussion towards the policy aspect of things, and possibly Nivedita can come in here. Despite India's scale and cultural complexities and the overt and covert nature of digital harms against children, so far all we have is the Digital Personal Data Protection Act to some extent, and the IT rules have in the past also safeguarded some of children's interest. And the DPDPA possibly also goes to the extent of the consequent targeting aspect of it as well. But there has been sufficient critique that it is still minimal and at times sweeping in its approach. For example, the detrimental effects aspect is not classified, or the age classification for VPC, which is a broad area. And I have seen the dialogues, I think a list of measures on how to get the verifiably safe process done, which is possibly the only document that I'm familiar with. I'm sure you have seen a lot more. If we are to momentarily look at United States Kids Online Safety Act and the UK's Online Safety Act for some benchmarks for the sake of it, COSA demands the platforms exercise a duty of care towards minors, or offer options to opt out of algorithmic recommendations, give more control to parents, and conduct more audits. The Online Safety Act in UK classifies harms into categories of illegal, which is absolutely unacceptable, primary priority content, and priority content. So the classification of harm aspect is addressed there. So in this context, Nivedita, would you help us understand the DPDPA's practical effectiveness or the lack of it? It's a really broad question, I know, but what can you do with it?
No. So I think couple of things, again drawing from international precedent, would be that yes, I don't think the US's COSA is yet passed. I mean, the bill is there. I think US does better at a state level, right? So, for instance, California has I think a design-centric, code similar to the UK, and I think the state of New York recently passed, Kids Safe Online Act. I mean, there is some expansion to it, but at the federal level, the US doesn't have anything great. But the UK, yes, the Online Safety Act of the US is pretty good, and the beauty of that is that it provides a safe internet for everybody, not just children. And we've had this conversation before, Nidhi. I am an advocate for safe internet for everybody. Singling out children, particularly in a country like India, which is already under-resourced, directs resources excessively. And then, one is not sure how exactly that gets used. But I mean, conversation for a different day once again. But needless to say, safe online or safe internet is important for children as well. Coming to the DPDP Act, I think there are some, not just the DPDP Act, just even generally speaking, as much as, some of even India's criminal laws, right, might be broad enough to take cognizance of some of this. The reality is that a lot of the offenses that are happening, whether it is, catfishing or, taking up other identities or grooming, for instance, many of these don't get defined specifically under India's penal code. And again, that is how the UK is different from India, because following the OSA, the Online Safety Act, the UK has also initiated changes in their respective criminal laws. India has not yet done that, even though we have the anti-trafficking bill and so on and so forth. The Indian, I think, criminal laws are not doing well enough in terms of specifically defining certain crimes as they pertain to children, and it still falls within the broader umbrella of crimes against adults. So I think that is one problem with India's law. The second problem with India's law, and you brought up the DPDP, and I will speak about it, is that yes, at one side it says that consent must be routed through parents. Secondly, the DPDP by its very nature does not, create heavily relies on individuals, the citizens of India, being aware of our rights and sort of raising grievances before the data protection officers. So it is heavily reliant on awareness and capacity at the citizen level, which by itself is a flawed approach. The third problem with India's tech laws and generally any law that is a welfare law is that we don't have audit mechanisms, we don't have impact measurement mechanisms that actually see whether the law is being implemented as it was envisaged, where has it failed, where can it be improved. And fourthly, again coming back to the DPDP, is that the DPDP does not, we don't have the rules. And so, as much as going through the parent may be a great idea, there are certain drawbacks there. The UK has come up with certain sort of certain ways of age verification that are less intrusive in terms of the problem is when you age gate or you age verify, you're collecting additional data to verify the age, and then you pass it through the parent, and then where are the additional safeguards to then safeguard all this data, and then what happens to children who are looking for let's say information pertaining to teenage pregnancies or safe sex or some such, and because of the parental involvement there, that's not happening. Another problem with involving parents is that now when you pass the consent through the parents are liable maybe for children's offenses committed by children or any sort of illegal activities that children children commit. So so there are the DPDP by itself, and generally even the concept of parental controls is a kind of a confusing concept. But my view is that yes, now that we have the law, there is very little we can do. Other than amend it, and we all know that the DPDP came after a lot of conversation, and recommending an amendment, as much as it may be desirable for all of us, is almost impractical. It's not going to happen in the short run. So as we wait for the rules, my expectation is that what would happen is that we approach this in a techno-legal we take a techno-legal approach. And what I mean by a techno-legal approach is that, now parents are so two elements to that. On one side, the platforms are mandated to allow flexibility to individuals to choose, how the algorithm behaves and not pre-control the algorithm at their end. The second is when you allow the parent or whoever the caregiver of the child is to sort of control that, right? And allow the parent, and there are a bunch of steps to do in this direction, and we've been working with some organizations here in Bangalore to develop a protocol around that. This will involve concepts such as confidential clean rooms where priorities can be shared safely without compromising the child, because if you are sharing a set of priorities, then you cannot go back to identifying the individual and so on and so forth. So but like at a meta level, a techno-legal arrangement through which there is algorithmic control or algorithmic preferences that can be set by parents at the level of the platform. And even as I say this, and going back to my own experience as a parent, the number of platforms and the number of innovations today are so many. My son says that he's not allowed. I don't allow him to operate an Instagram account, but all his friends use Instagram to chat. So he has found this other client that helps him to participate in the Instagram chat or the messaging feature without indulging in the Instagram posting or the Instagram stories feature, right? And so it is impossible for parents to keep track of all of this. But I mean, we do have the law, and my sense is that's how, with techno-legal sort of solutions, we try and make the best of it.
Thanks, Nivedita. Very important point about what kind of content gets censored from the parents' end as well, and also in an ecosystem which is heavy-handed when it comes to surveillance and censorship. Children's opinions and right to self-expression, if it is whether it's LGBTQAI children or religious aspects, there's a lot of context and complexities involved. So obviously, we already have an act, and the rules are still being discussed, if I'm not wrong. Aparajita, you also have some thoughts on the design aspects of the platforms, which could be introduced in future Indian laws. Would you share that with us, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nivedita. I think you made a lot of good points about the problems with DPDP. I just want to say, first of all, platform design, we've already had some experience with it, right? So UK actually had the age appropriate design code since 2021. They've actually just done a paper, LSE's done a paper where they have actually documented. And if you open the chat for me to share with everyone, I can actually share the link. I just opened it now. That 127 changes have been made on the 4 main platforms, which is YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram, for minor kids. And what they are actually trying to see now is what are these 127 changes, and out of that, how many relate to privacy, how many relate to recommend their engines, how many relate to recommend parental controls, and how many relate to, I think, addiction and time spent online. And I think that is the level of work that we need to do here also, but also because now it's happening in other geographies, and all these are multinational companies. Many of these platform features are actually available across geographies. So I have a more optimistic view that, because there has been pressure on tech companies to solve this problem, and it's an existential threat for them, keeping children safe online, I think there has been some improvement in terms of platform design. I think, however, our Indian law, as Nivedita was saying, it's based on completely consent-based. Forget parents. Just think about all of us. Are we really going to read through everything? If we have to use WhatsApp, no matter what they ask for, we will have to use WhatsApp, right? So you cannot, unless you address the unless you address the concept of choice in tech, you are not going to be able to address the concept of privacy to an extent. And because we made it so much based on consent, we have put all the onus on parents. And many submissions were made to Ministry of Electronics and IT, that if you put the threshold first of all, at 18, now children use internet so much that by 18 they're not that enamored by it, maybe, because they have had the phone in their hand since they're kids. So between 13 to 18, children are going through so much, and we've put all the onus on parents to keep a track. And as Nivedita was saying, one thing about children is they will find a way. I heard now that, even when children are using shared devices, if they are dating somebody, they actually use gaming apps to message each other, because they know that their parents will check messaging platforms. So kids know that their parents are not smart enough to think now gaming apps can also be used to chat with your girlfriend or boyfriend. So you cannot, underestimate children. No matter what you do, they will find a way to circumvent. And therefore, what would have been better is that you put some onus on platforms as well, but you let children more access, in the sense that we are such an uneven, digitally divided sort of a country. not only I mean, what we should have ideally done is have this kind of design guidance, platform guidance, and have a shared responsibility between parents and platforms in some way. Whereas what we've done is we've actually given sort of like a shortcut that if the parent says yes, even if it is not an actual choice, it's up to the parent. It's parents' responsibility that the option was given to children. And the second point that I do want to make is we have to invest in making children resilient. You can do all of this. You can do platform design. You can do parents' education. We can keep on going in loops. But I do think, and we had done this study, in fact, in partnership with Instagram, it was about building resilience in teenagers. I think a lot of child psychologists, a lot of people say that generally also resilience is sort of going down among children, and that's due to not just technology but so many other things in society, right? I mean, the family size is decreasing, you're not being able to go out, you're living a more isolated life. Some of it is due to technology, some of it is also climate change. At 52 degrees in Delhi, how will you go out and play? So there are multiple things at play, and in this world where technologies march today or any time in the history is almost sort of, it cannot be stopped, we have to also teach children to be able to deal with, to take care of themselves better. We have done that in the physical world, and we have to do it in the online world. I also want to add that even in the physical world, West does it quite differently. Their child protection agencies are far more resourced. Their child protection, the state comes in very heavily when a child is at risk. In India, even in the physical world, we are not able to do it. So in the online space as well, when we have so many lower income kids, who are actually, for them, access to internet is access to economic opportunity almost. Therefore, there's even more need to invest in children's resilience in a place like India. And I think that is why we need to engage with government more and give this point of view also to the government that, we have to do a mix of everything. We also have to get Ministry of Education involved. It just can't be Ministry of Electronics and IT who's sitting and making laws on some of these things.
Absolutely, Aparajita. And both Aparajita and Chitra have also been talking about the gendered digital divide and how some of these, hard-handed or heavy-handed regulation can impact the accessibility of digital opportunities for women. And I want to keep this discussion going, but at the same time, being mindful of the time, I want to open the room for Q&A as well. There are some important voices in the room as well. I know, I believe Sonali is also here, and Reena is also here. Amitabh is also here. If you have any thoughts, I would like you to kind of possibly share it now to any of the discussion elements that we've had, and we'll keep the discussion going as well. Thanks, Aparajita. Aparajita has shared the study, the LSE study, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Aparajita, you're on mute.
It's just been published in May 2024. So this is like a very recent study, and I think it's quite brilliant if you go through it.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. This has been a huge learning opportunity for us all. So while this discussion was really basic, and I know the collective knowledge in this room on this issue is really, really advanced, I think a lot of other peoples in this room might have also benefited from the fundamentals that we were discussing here. Any thoughts, anybody?
I just wanted to say that the Prajita, the last point that you've mentioned about we need more people, stakeholders, and even the ministries, the whole burden and the whole discussion is now just pushed to IT, MeTi. But you're very right. We need more Ministry of Women and Child, Home Affairs, Education. I think all of them need to work together, and we need to work with them, and they need to be in the same room, so that the robust framework that we talk about, the holistic discussion that we talk about, I think it will only happen then. So I just want to highlight that. Absolutely in agreement with that point.
Thanks, Arnika. And Arnika, I think while, it requires many things to come together, even to make a little start, there would be possibly, some areas that need some more stress. And Aparajita has talked about how resilience in children is one aspect. We talk about information literacy being a very, very powerful tool, but for the education departments in each state to even recognize that it should ideally become part of the curriculum is going to take some time as well. Dhanya, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad to hear a lot of wonderful points, but a couple of things that came across was actually the lack of digital awareness amongst parents and teachers and the community as a whole. And we live in a time where, despite and we talk about different income groups and we talk about different strata of society, but even within the educated class, there is a resistance to actually coming across and voicing your concerns or placing a complaint when there's actually a crime that's been committed, whether it be online or offline. There are enough people that I know who've decided to just gloss over it and not bring it across for fear of any sort of public outcry or the sort of what it'll do to their family and their status and so on and so forth. So as a parent at this point in time, having heard all the different voices, I'm still left wondering and wanting actually that we need to be able to get across to even to the educators, because even the teachers' lack of understanding and inability to actually help is worrying, because as you said, it can't always be just parents. We do have our own, there are limitations to what we can do and what we cannot do while still being a friend and available to our child. So while Nidhi is doing a lot of things, and one of the things I keep telling her is coming and talking to some of the schools, because instead of parents crying themselves hoarse, children might listen to a more objective third person when they say that there's an actual threat than the parent going cranky. But I'm beginning to wonder how, like you said, Nivedita said, there's still an echo chamber. So I'm beginning to wonder how much more can we do as people who are invested and scared and worried and concerned to bring about tangible change.
I just wanted to respond to that, if I may. I think that's a very, very important point. And I think there are two things that I just wanted to add to this, conversation. One is that, all of us, we may be handful, but we're all doing a lot of work, but we don't know what is really working and what's not working. And I think some of the work that we've been doing is phenomenal, but I think what's happening is there is not enough evidence on what are those real interventions which can actually make the dent in terms of combating online harm. If we look at it from the point of view, say, public health, or if you were to look at, crime against drug or arms, there is some amount of work that is happening and there is an understanding. But here, I think we're still figuring out what really works and what doesn't. And, there is so much investment required to even do that part of the work that, some of them are able to do, say, training awareness for children, some are able to do for parents, some are able to do something. And it's all driven by the funding ecosystem and the politics of funding as well right now. I just wanted to say one thing is that there is only one intervention which is very well studied, and there are enough and more meta-analysis on that, is awareness trainings. And, when you're looking at awareness trainings, one thing that has really come out, and I'm trying to bring that up because what Dhanya said, is training awareness, if it is done with children and home, along with the educators, that's the only time awareness programs work. And there is a clear evidence to show that that's when it works. And this has been happening through the fact that schools made digital safety mandatory in many parts of the US. So I think, there are enough evidence on how awareness programs do create knowledge, but we don't know whether they reduce the harmful behaviors of children. So I think there is a lot of work in terms of choosing what we have to do, what is the rationale for why we are doing what we're doing, and how do we influence the funding ecosystem to actually drive them to be able to invest in the right thing. I think that's going to be very critical because there are not many funders, there are not many organizations working on this. So we have to be extremely prudent about how we want to operate in this space to actually combat the online harm and really work on this issue.
Absolutely right, Chitra. And I think I'd like to chime in on what Dhanya was saying. We have been advocating the aspect that both parents and educators have to be together in this room. Although they have the child's best interest at, in question, often they tend to belong to different camps. So getting them together for the education is very crucial, and it has to literally become a movement for it to kind of pick up in momentum. Ami has asked a question, and I just want to float it to the panel, and possibly, Arnika can also respond to this. Like in other industries, standards and fines have led to investment in safety. Currently, 99% of trust and safety is outsourced to the cheapest provider. Wondering, any thoughts on that? Push for Indian online safety standards or higher fines for not following them? Arnika, would you want to pick up? And after that, I'll ask Reena to speak.
I think Ami and I have been asking these questions. We are colleagues. We've been asking this question to each other. I would be very happy if any other panelists, Aparajita, Nivedita, Chitra, if you want to take this up, because we share the same opinion on this. So, yeah.
Sure, Nivedita. So go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry. So I think that, yes, child safety by itself, even other aspects, I mean, even in the physical world, right? Even in schools, there needs to be something called a child safety committee or a child protection committee. Implementing that itself is so difficult, right? Like we are seeing a lot of resistance. But when one or two instances do happen, or you find that a parent or a teacher brings it up and sort of, almost threatens the school that, I have brought this up and you have not heeded me, then the school or the institution very quickly springs into action. So also we see with LGBTQIA rights, with many such things where there is a legislative basis for certain things, and there is non-compliance. When there is a problem and that gets flagged, the action is quite swift. Now, it is sad that we are waiting for something wrong to happen before one, jumps into motion. But certainly, the availability of that provision has become quite advantageous. So this is on one hand. The other hand is that even though these type of safety committees or statutory setup may be tokenistic at the beginning, over time something happens and there is a shift in the way it is perceived, because even though they pay the lowest, let's say, the cheapest service provider, and we do provide a lot of posh trainings, and maybe we got selected because we were the cheapest service provider, even so we are seeing a slow shift in conversations from the beginning, where they said that just come and do some training and just we will just tell us what form we need to file and we'll file, to now saying we want more people to use this. We think that we are losing our students, I mean losing our employees or losing our students because of this, and we don't want that to happen. And then how can we more meaningfully comply with this? So I think the presence of that is certainly helpful.
Thanks, Nivedita. Reena, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thanks, Nidhi, for getting this conversation happening. Just wanted to update, NCERT has been having video classes on cyber safety. It's just started, and they're pretty, pretty much the basics, but they're doing a good job from what I've just seen a few videos, but a little bit, but at least it's a start. And also the cybercrime department of Home Affairs is also building their, they're also going to do their cyber security training in building awareness in the space. So there is work happening. Long way to go, but at least it's happening. So just wanted to update regarding that.
Thanks, Reena. Thanks for sharing that. Reena spearheads Bodhini, which is a Kochi-based NGO working for child safety. We are trying to bring all these isolated voices together. There are, all these work happening in different silos. At this point, Sonali, would you like?
Yeah, just sorry to cut in, but just to correct, like Nivedita said, online safety covering all gender, all ages, not child safety. That's what Bodhini is doing. And awareness sessions and resource creation is one of our main forte.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sonali, would you like to? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. One is thank you for getting us all together. And I'm happy that we're all talking the same things. But I'm very sad that how long are we going to talk, and how long is it going to take to actually see the change happen? And when we spoke about how things changed when drug abuse and interventions on drug abuse started, they also probably took 20 years to get there. So we have a long journey to go, I think. My deepest concern is towards sexual radicalization of children today, which is beginning at probably the age of 6. And if that is not dealt with a state of emergency, I mean, actually, we as a community need to be very worried of what it is going to and how it is going to impact children and their future. Though we've raised multiple voices at different forums, at the government, non-government platforms, I just think this collective has to be strengthened. Maybe meeting once a month, voicing out, key concerns, putting them up and, flooding them with messages or whatever. I know each one of us been trying this from our end, but in individual capacity, you cannot keep your work aside and keep doing this. So I think maybe a consortium or something that brings us all together with the voices strengthened will create an impact for sure. Secondly, I also want to share that all of these resources can be pooled into a bank where they can be used, because then we're not reinventing the wheel and investing the limited resources that we have into something that's already being done. So if this can be done as a pool, and if we create that pool, I think these resources will be very helpful for us to seek references from, and even for the funders to be able to provide substantial enough of evidence of work down on ground. Just 2 points, but I'm glad I was here, and hats off to the efforts taken here.
Thank you, Sonali. And that is a very concrete suggestion that you have made, a consortium probably to address a lot of issues that we spoke about today. First, the nuances of the issue itself, and also the funding opportunities to get all these isolated voices to reach where it's meant to, and not just voices, all the efforts that are being done. To conclude, Aparajita, would you want to also kind of point to one concrete direction? And then I think we're already over time. We will wind up.
Yeah. So, Nidhi, I'll just take 2 minutes. I feel like one opportunity where we have to engage with the government is when it starts thinking about the Digital India Bill, which, is likely to replace the IT Act 2000. It will talk about a lot of online harms and safety. We are, in fact, going to undertake a research on what are the harms that are already covered. Because if you see actually under POXO, etc., and there was a recent Supreme Court case as well, where NCPCR has said that platform has the same responsibility as anybody else under POXO, and Supreme Court has reserved their judgment. So we want to map that under already existing laws, what are the different harms that are already covered, and how are they sort of, what are the platform responsibilities, and what is it that is not covered. Right. So that's something that we are going to study. And I feel like that is a very important place where we should, as a community, engage with the government and share our experiences. The second thing I just want to say is, I think more than being prescriptive that, let's do this platform change, let's do this platform change. One principle that I feel we need to advocate for is more transparency from platforms. And transparency, not, I mean, algorithmic transparency, because I feel like that's never going to go through that, you share what your algorithm is, but what is the impact of your algorithm? What are the harms that are getting reported the most? What are the complaints that you're getting the most? And this can happen through regulation. And in fact, if you see DSA, etc., that's what they are also trying to do, because what we need to identify is systemic risks. Right? Even this panel will not decide on every piece of content that this is suitable for a child or this is not suitable for a child. Somebody will be more conservative, somebody will be more liberal, somebody is more okay with children, exploring their sexuality online. Some parents are not doing that. But we have to identify systemic risks at an aggregate level, and regulation to that extent needs to first address systemic risks. Then child to child risk, fortunately or unfortunately, parents, if they are able to monitor, they will have to do it on the basis of their own moral compass in some ways. But I think regulation has a huge role to play in bringing about transparency, identifying systemic risks, and making sure that platforms are addressing them. That's what I think we can do through DIA when it comes.
Thank you, Aparajita. And on that note, I think I'll just summarize that I'm so glad that this community has brought up possible actions that can be taken here on. It may again not happen immediately, but first of all, to come together as panelists, as parents, as people who are tackling this issue, it has been a great knowledge exchange. What we are going to do next is we are going to use the recording to document every complexity that was discussed towards the issue, and also list down the solutions that you have talked about today, and put it into a very simple paper. It might take a little longer because I have to give a shout out to my very, very small team of Aditi, Akash, and me, who are trying to get all these things done together. And we are raring to go as ever. Aditi will be leaving us in July to go study tech policy in the UK. So she has done some phenomenal work while she has been with us. Once the paper is out, I'll be sharing it with all of you. We will try and speak to policymakers and people in the system wherever possible within our networks and see how we can take this work forward. Thank you very much for joining us once again. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.